Two men stood outside the restaurant's service entrance, speaking low and fast in Italian, their voices tight with the kind of urgency that doesn't belong near a five-star kitchen. One of them pressed his phone to his chest and said the word clearly, "Bomba." The other nodded, checked his watch, and lit a cigarette like they hadn't just decided someone was going to die tonight. Claire heard every word. She was carrying a tray of water glasses, and she didn't drop a single one. But her hands had gone completely cold. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Claire Navarro had worked at Renata's for 4 years, and in 4 years, she had learned one thing above everything else: the best servers are the ones nobody sees. That was not a complaint, that was survival. Renata's wasn't the kind of restaurant where you made friends with the guests. It was the kind of place where the tablecloths cost more than her electric bill, where the wine list was presented in a leather binder, and where certain tables in the East Wing were never listed on the reservation system. They were simply held for certain people, and those certain people expected a specific kind of service, fast, quiet, and completely forgettable. Claire was exceptional at being forgettable. She was 36 years old with dark hair she kept pinning back under her work uniform, and the kind of tired in her eyes that didn't come from one bad night, but from about 1,000 of them stacked on top of each other. She had a daughter named Lily who was 8 years old and had her father's laugh and Claire's stubbornness, and every single thing Claire did inside that restaurant, every tray she balanced, every order she memorized, every second she stayed on her feet past the point of comfort she did because of Lily. Not for the glamour. Not for the tips, though. The tips at Renata's were extraordinary. For Lily, that was the foundation of everything. The night it all changed was a Thursday, not even a Friday, not even a Saturday. A Thursday in November when the city had that particular cold that got into the back of your neck and stayed there, and Renata's was operating at about 70% capacity, which for Renata's still meant a full house. Claire had the East Wing that night. She remembered the moment she got the assignment because her colleague, a younger woman named Desiree, who had been working there for 18 months and still hadn't figured out the unspoken rules, leaned over and whispered, "Table 9 is yours tonight. I heard they asked for you." Claire looked at her. "They asked for me by name." Desiree shrugged. "That's what Marcus said. He said the guest specifically requested the quiet one." That was what they called her in the back. The quiet one. Claire had never decided whether it was a compliment. She straightened her apron, picked up her order pad, even though she rarely needed it, and walked into the East Wing. Table 9 sat in the far corner of the room, positioned with its back to the wall and a clear line of sight to every entrance. Claire noticed that every single time she brought someone to that table. It wasn't a coincidence of interior design. Somebody had thought very carefully about where that table sat. There were 4 men at the table. 3 of them were the kind of men you noticed and then immediately looked away from broad-shouldered quiet in the way that suggested they were always listening with the particular stillness of people who had trained themselves not to fidget. They were dressed well. That was something she had come to understand about this world. The more dangerous a man was, the better he dressed. The 4th man was Marco Key. She had served Marco Key 6 times before this night. She knew this because she kept a mental log of every guest in the East Wing, not out of curiosity, but out of professional necessity. The East Wing guests had patterns. They had preferences. They had things they did not want to be asked twice. The way to serve them well was to study them the way you studied a map before a long drive. You did it before you arrived, not after you were already lost. Marco Key was 44 years old, though he carried himself with the kind of contained authority that made it difficult to attach a number to him. He was Korean-Italian, a combination that had given him cheekbones that were almost architectural and a stillness in his face that Claire had initially mistaken for coldness. Over 6 visits, she had revised that reading. It wasn't coldness, it was control. They were different things, though they looked identical from the outside. He ordered the same 3 things every visit. Still water with lemon on the side, the branzino medium with the sauce served separately, and a single glass of Barolo that he nursed for the entire meal and rarely finished. He never looked at the menu. He never asked for modifications. He never complained. He said please and thank you in the same flat, precise tone he used for everything else, and he tipped exactly 25%, which Claire had calculated enough times to know it was deliberate. She approached the table and said, "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back." The three men gave her the standard non-acknowledgement. Their eyes moved to her and then through her like she was a pane of glass. Marco looked up from what he was reading, a folded piece of paper, not a phone, which she had also noted, and said, "Good evening." Just that, 2 words. But he said them like he meant them, which in her experience was rarer than it sounded. She took the drink orders. She brought the drinks. She brought the bread that she knew better than to offer. It was placed on the table without comment. She stayed close enough to be useful and far enough away to be invisible, and for the first 40 minutes of the evening, everything was exactly as it always was. Then she went to the kitchen to check on the timing of the entrees, and on her way back through the service corridor, she stepped outside through the delivery entrance to get some air, which she did on busy nights when the kitchen heat got to be too much. And that was when she heard the voices. There were 2 men standing between the side wall of the building and a black SUV parked at the curb. She recognized them vaguely. They had come in with Marco's group, the ones who typically waited outside rather than sitting at the table. She had seen them before. They were part of the landscape. They were speaking Italian. Fast low with the occasional glance toward the street. Claire had grown up in a neighborhood in South Philadelphia where Italian was spoken in about a third of the houses. She wasn't fluent, but she was not as lost as most people would have been standing there in the cold, and what she heard made her stay very, very still. Most of it she could piece together from context rather than vocabulary. The words macchina and lui and stasera, the car, him, tonight, and then unmistakably clearly in a voice that was almost casual, bomba. Her brain tried to do what brains do. It tried to offer her an alternative interpretation. Maybe they were talking about something else. Maybe bomba meant something different in this context. Maybe she had misheard. But her body didn't believe any of that for a single second. Her body believed what her body had always believed, which was that when something felt wrong, it usually was, and what she felt standing in that cold service corridor was the specific bone-level wrongness of a plan that had already been set in motion. She went back inside. She stood in the service corridor for approximately 15 seconds and did something she was very good at, which was thinking without panicking. She had been managing single-parent emergencies for 8 years. She had been managing the specific chaos of a high-end restaurant floor for 4. She knew how to take a piece of information that felt enormous and break it down into what actually needed to happen right now in the next 60 seconds. The question was simple. Was she going to do something, or was she going to walk back to table 9 with 3 branzinos and a rack of lamb and pretend she hadn't heard anything? She thought about Lily. She always thought about Lily, but not the way people assumed, not as a reason to stay safe, but as a reminder of what mattered. Lily had grown up watching her mother make decisions. The right decisions, the hard ones. Claire had never once let her daughter see her walk away from something because it was easier. She walked back to the east wing. She set the entrees down. She checked the water. She waited until the 3 men at the table were engaged in their own quiet conversation, and then she leaned slightly toward Marco and said very quietly, "When you leave tonight, please don't go directly to your car." The words came out steadier than she had expected. Marco's hand, which had been lifting his fork, stopped. He looked at her. Not through her, at her. Like she had suddenly come into focus after months of being a pleasant, competent blur. "Excuse me," he said. "I heard something," she said. "Outside, near the cars. I think you should know before you leave." One of the men at the table shifted. She felt it more than saw it, a kind of alertness that moved through the 3 of them like a current. Marco said, "Sit down, please." She almost told him she couldn't sit down. She was working. There were 4 other tables in her section. Instead, she sat down, because his voice had the quality of something that didn't need to be said twice. "What did you hear?" he said. His voice was completely even. That was what struck her. Not alarmed, not suspicious, just present in the way that someone is present when they understand that what's being said to them is important. "2 men," she said, "outside near the black car. They were speaking Italian. I caught pieces of it. I heard them say the car and tonight and then the word for bomb." The table went very quiet. She kept her eyes on Marco because looking at the other men felt like it might set something off. "I'm not 100% certain I understood the full context," she said, "but I felt like I couldn't not tell you." Marco looked at her for a moment that lasted long enough to make her aware of her own breathing. Then he said, "You speak Italian." "Some, not fluently. I grew up around it." "And you came directly to me?" "Yes." "You didn't call the police?" She hesitated for just a beat. "I thought about it, but I wasn't sure I had enough to say." "And I thought," she stopped. "You thought what? I thought if I was wrong about what I heard and I caused a scene and it turned out to be nothing, then I've created a situation for you in a public place that you probably don't want." He held her gaze for another moment, and something moved across his face that was too subtle for her to name. He glanced at the man on his left, not a full turn of the head, just a fractional shift of his eyes, and said something in Italian low and fast that Claire caught only partially. It sounded like instructions. The man stood up without a word and walked toward the back of the restaurant. Marco looked back at her. "What's your name?" "Claire." "Claire," he said like he was filing it somewhere. "How long have you worked here?" "4 years." "You've served me before." "6 times, including tonight." Something very faint crossed his face, not quite a smile, but close to the idea of one. "You count." "I remember all the East Wing guests," she said. "It helps me do my job." He nodded slowly. "All right, Claire, I want you to go back to work, act completely normal. Don't tell anyone what you heard. Don't go back outside. Can you do that?" "Yes. And if anyone asks you anything, anyone at all, including people who work here, you serve my table, you brought the food." End of story. "Understood." "Good." He picked up his fork again. Then he stopped and looked at her one more time. "Thank you." She stood up. She picked up her order pad. She walked back to the service station, and she refilled a water glass, and she checked in on 2 other tables, and she did not for the remaining 2 hours of her shift let her hands shake visibly. Internally was a different story. She went through the motions with the precision of someone running on adrenaline and muscle memory. A couple at table 12 wanted to know about the dessert menu. A man at table 7 asked her to recommend between the duck and the lamb. She answered everything correctly because her mouth knew what to do, even when her brain was running a parallel track at a much higher speed. What she kept coming back to was not the danger. It was Marco's face when she told him. There had been no panic, no visible fear, no anger, just that sharpening like a lens adjusting its focus, and then a series of decisions made in the time it took most people to process the information. She had been in enough difficult situations in her life to recognize what competence looked like under pressure. And what she had seen in his face was something she had almost never seen in another human being. He had not been surprised that the threat existed. He had been surprised that she'd told him. Around 10:15, Enzo, a man she had seen at Marco's table before, compact and quiet with a scar along his jaw, came and stood near the service entrance and waited until she passed him and said in a voice that was barely above a murmur, "The situation has been handled. Mr. Key would like you to know." She looked at him. "Handled how?" "The car wasn't taken. The device was removed. The police will find it tomorrow in a way that doesn't involve tonight." He paused. "You should know there were 2 separate charges. If he had gotten in that car, there would have been nothing left of it." She stood there with an empty tray in her hands and breathed through what that sentence did to her chest. "Who put it there?" she said. "That's not something I can tell you." "Is he safe?" "For tonight, yes. And is there a reason I should be worried about myself?" Enzo looked at her with the particular steadiness of someone who had been trained to deliver difficult information without flinching. "The men outside have been removed. They didn't see your face clearly in the dark. As far as we know, they don't know who tipped Mr. Kai off." "As far as you know," she said. "As far as we know," he confirmed. He didn't insult her by pretending it was more certain than that. She finished her shift. She cashed out her tips. She changed out of her uniform in the back room and said goodnight to Desiree and to the kitchen crew, and she walked out of Renata's at 11:45 p.m., the same way she always did, except that tonight there was a black car idling at the corner that she had never seen before. And when she reached the sidewalk, a man she didn't recognize held the door open and said, "Mr. Key arranged for you to be driven home tonight, Ms. Navarro." She wanted to say she was fine, she could take the train. She had taken the train home at midnight 100 times. She was perfectly capable. Instead, she got in the car because she understood even then that the decisions she had made in that service corridor had consequences that were still unfolding. And the right response to a consequence was not pretending it wasn't happening. The drive took 12 minutes. The man who drove her didn't speak, and she didn't ask him to. When they pulled up in front of her building, he waited until she had the front door open before he pulled away, and she stood in her building's lobby for a moment and thought about what it meant that someone had watched her go inside. She took the elevator to the fourth floor. She opened the door to her apartment. Mr. Caruso from next door, who sat with Lily on the evenings Claire worked late, was asleep on the couch with the television on, and Lily was asleep in her room with one arm hanging off the bed and her hair spread out like she had been arguing with her pillow. Claire stood in the doorway of Lily's room for a long time. She thought about two separate explosive charges. She thought about a car that would have left nothing. She thought about a man who had sat across from her and said thank you with the same precision he applied to everything else, and how that precision had in the space of 2 hours dismantled the comfortable anonymity she had spent 4 years building. She thought about what came next. She wasn't someone who deluded herself. She was practical. She had been practical since she was 22 years old and pregnant and alone in a way that required figuring things out fast. She knew standing in that doorway that nothing about this was simple. Marco Kai was not a simple man. The world he moved in was not a world that had simple edges. She had pushed open a door tonight, not metaphorically, but in the way that certain actions are genuinely irreversible, and the question was not whether she could go back through it. The question was, what was standing on the other side? She went to bed. She didn't sleep for a long time. When she finally did, she dreamed about nothing, which was either a gift or her brain's polite refusal to process anything more that night. In the morning, Lily made toast and talked about her spelling test and asked if Claire was tired because she had that face, and Claire said yes, just a long night. And Lily accepted that the way children accept things when they trust that the adult in the room is handling it. And Claire poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table and felt very specifically the weight of living a double life that had begun without her permission approximately 18 hours ago. She didn't know then that Marco Key would be back at Renata's the following Thursday. She didn't know that when he walked in and she brought him his still water with lemon and his Bronzino and his single glass of Barolo, he would look at her like she was a person he had decided to know. Not the pleasant, competent blur from before, but an actual person with weight and dimension and a place in the landscape of things that mattered to him. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee and her daughter's voice in the background was that she had made a choice. She had chosen to walk back through that service corridor and say something instead of nothing. And whatever that choice cost her, whatever it opened up in front of her, she did not, sitting there that morning, regret it. That was the thing about Claire Navarro. She was a lot of things: tired, stretched, thin, cautious, careful, practiced in the art of being overlooked. But she had never in her 36 years been someone who walked away from the thing that needed to be done, even when the thing that needed to be done was going to change absolutely everything. Marco came back the following Thursday. Claire knew he would. She had told herself all week that she didn't know that she was not the kind of woman who spent her free hours constructing predictions about the movements of dangerous men. But when she walked into Renata's at 4:30 for her shift and saw that table 9 had been marked reserved in the system, she felt something settle in her chest that had no business being there. Not relief exactly, something quieter than relief, something more like recognition. She told herself it didn't mean anything. She got through her prep work. She restocked the service station. She went through the evening specials with the kitchen and confirmed the timing on the larger parties. She was good at all of this. She was good at the work, and the work had always been enough to keep the rest of the noise at bay. 4 years of that, 4 years of using precision and routine as a kind of armor. He arrived at 7:42. This time there were only 2 men with him, not 3. She noticed that immediately. She noticed also that he sat down and looked across the room before he looked at the table in front of him, which was something she had not clocked in his previous visits. Or maybe she had not been watching closely enough before. Maybe she was watching too closely now. She approached the table and said, "Good evening." He looked up and said, "Good evening, Claire." Her name. Just that. But there was something different in how he said it now, not formal, not transactional. Like he had thought about it between last Thursday and this one and decided she had earned the right to be addressed as a person rather than a function. One of the men across the table shifted slightly. She brought the water. She brought the bread. She started to walk away and Marco said quietly, "I want to speak with you. When you have a moment." She turned back. "Of course, I'll check back after the first course." She went to 3 other tables. She took 2 orders and delivered one and refilled 2 glasses of wine and smiled at a couple celebrating what appeared to be a significant anniversary, and the entire time part of her mind was running a steady background calculation about what Marco Key wanted to say to her and whether she was prepared to hear it. When she came back to table 9, the 2 men had been sent somewhere else. The table was just Marco and 2 untouched glasses of water. She sat down before he asked her to this time. She wasn't sure why she did it. Instinct, maybe, or the understanding that whatever conversation was coming was better had between equals than between a customer and a server. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "How are you?" Oh, she had not expected that. "I'm fine," she said. Then because it was the truth, and she had decided sometime between last Thursday and this one, that she was done being less than honest with this man. "I didn't sleep well for a few days, but I'm fine." "That's understandable." "Is it? You seemed to sleep perfectly fine." Something moved in his face, that almost smile again. "I didn't say I slept fine. I said your reaction was understandable." She looked at him. "What did you want to speak with me about?" "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said, "and I wanted to ask you something." "Ask." "Did you go back outside that night after you heard them?" "No, you told me not to." "You followed that instruction." "You seemed like someone whose instructions were worth following," she said. He nodded once. "The men who were outside, they've been dealt with. I want you to know that. Not because I think you're in danger, but because you deserve to know the situation was resolved. Enzo told me as much that night. I know, I wanted to tell you myself." She looked at him and something in her chest did something inconvenient. She pressed it flat and said, "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone deciding how many of the right ones to use. "Because what you did wasn't small. I've been in this business for a long time. People don't tell me things. They look the other way. They hear something and they decide it isn't their problem. You walked back in and told me something that could have gotten you seriously hurt, and you did it without being asked and without making it dramatic." He paused. "I wanted you to hear from me directly that I'm aware of what it cost." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "It didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to spend." "That's exactly what I mean," he said. The conversation ended there because one of his men reappeared at the edge of the room, and Marco's attention shifted to him with that immediate complete quality that she had noticed before, the way he could be present with her 1 second and 100% somewhere else the next. He exchanged a few words in Italian, too quiet for her to catch, and the man left again. Marco looked back at her. "Go take care of your tables. We can talk when things slow down." "You'll be here a while." "I'll be here until you tell me the kitchen is closing," and he said. She stood up. She went back to work. At 9:15, something happened that she did not see coming. A woman came into Renata's. She was somewhere in her late 40s, dressed with the particular severity of someone who had chosen power over elegance, and she walked in without a reservation and asked for the manager in a voice that carried across the room. Claire watched from the service station as Marcus, the floor manager, came out of the back, and the woman spoke to him at low volume for approximately 45 seconds, and Marcus's face did something Claire had never seen it do before, which was go completely blank. The woman was escorted to a table near the front. Claire thought nothing of it until she went to the service station, and Desiree appeared at her elbow and said, "Do you know who that is?" "No." "Her name is Renata Cosi. She's the owner." Claire looked at her. "Renata as in Renata's." "She hasn't been in here in 2 years, Desiree said. "Marcus looks like he's going to be sick." Claire looked at the woman at the front table and then at Marcus, who was indeed doing something very convincing with his face while talking to the woman and radiating the very specific energy of a person trying to remain upright. Then Marcus looked across the room at Claire. He walked over to her with the brisk, contained stride of someone delivering information he would have preferred not to deliver and said quietly, "Ms. Cosi would like to speak with you." Claire set down the tray she was holding. "With me specifically. With you specifically." She walked to the front table. Renata Cozy looked at her with the direct assessing gaze of someone who had made a career out of reading people fast. She said, "Sit down." The same two words Marco had said to her a week ago. Claire sat down. "You're the server who spent time at table 9 last Thursday," Renata Cozy said. "Not a question." "I was working the East Wing that night," Claire said. "Yes. I've heard different things about what happened. I want to hear it from you." Claire held the woman's gaze and made a decision in approximately 1 second. "I overheard something concerning near the service entrance, and I passed it to the guest at table 9. Concerning how? I'd rather not say in detail. The situation was resolved." Renata Cozy looked at her for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable in the specific way of someone who has been unreadable for so long it has become their natural face. "You know who Marco Key is," she said. "I know he's a regular guest." "Don't," Renata said quietly. Not unkindly, just the word flat and clean like a correction. "You've worked in this restaurant for 4 years. You run the East Wing. You are not a woman who doesn't know things." Claire looked at her. "I know he's someone who matters to this restaurant. He matters to this city," Renata Cozy said. "And what you did last Thursday matters to a great many people, most of whom you will never meet." She paused. "I came in tonight to look at you, to see what kind of person you are. And I'll let you know," Renata said. She picked up the menu, which was a dismissal, and Claire stood up and walked back to the service station and stood there for a moment with her hands pressed flat on the counter. Desiree appeared. "What did she want?" "She wanted to meet me," Claire said. "What? I have no idea," Claire said, which was approximately 40% true. She finished the service. She cleared 4 tables and handled a late walk-in and helped reset the East Wing. At 10:50, when the floor was down to 2 tables, she brought Marco his check, and he looked at it and said, "Sit down for a moment." "I'm closing out," she said. "Sit down for a moment, Claire." She sat down. He said, "Renata came in tonight. I noticed. She came to see you, She said as much." "What did you tell her?" "That I overheard something and passed it along, that the situation was resolved." He nodded. That was exactly right. He looked at her with that focused, steady attention that she had stopped trying to interpret and was now simply learning to sit in. "She doesn't come in here, not for years. The fact that she came in tonight means she's been watching this more closely than I expected." "Is that a problem?" Claire said. "It's a complication," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him. "For you or for me?" He was quiet for a moment. "For both of us." She let that sit between them without filling it up with words, because she had learned in the past week that silence in Marco Key's vicinity was not something that needed to be managed. He used it the same way he used everything else, with intention. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me straight." "All right. Am I in danger?" He looked at her without flinching. "I don't believe you're in immediate danger. The men who placed the device didn't see your face clearly. They were removed before they could gather more information. But I would be lying to you if I said there was no risk at all." "Who are they?" "The kind of people I've been dealing with for a very long time," he said. "People who want things I have and are not willing to wait." "That tells me nothing." "It tells you everything you actually need to know," he said. "The specifics won't protect you. What protects you is knowing that I am aware of the risks to you and that I take it seriously." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why would you take it seriously? I'm a waitress." He held her gaze. "You're a woman who ran toward a problem when everyone else would have run the other way. In my experience, that kind of person is rare enough to be worth protecting." The words landed somewhere she hadn't prepared for. She held them there without letting them do whatever they were trying to do. "I have a daughter," she said. It came out before she had decided to say it. "She's 8. Her name is Lily." Something shifted in his face, subtle, but she saw it. "I know," he said. She stared at him. "You know? I had you looked into after last Thursday. I needed to understand your situation." The floor dropped out slightly from under her. "You ran a background check on me." "Yes." "Without asking me." "Yes, I needed information and I didn't have the luxury of time. I understand if that bothers you." "It does bother me," she said, and her voice was very level. "It bothers me significantly." "That's fair. he said without argument and without apology, which was somehow more disarming than either would have been. She looked at him. What did you find? That you're exactly who you appear to be, he said, which in my world is so unusual it almost made me suspicious. She heard the almost and understood it completely. And Lily is not touched by any of this. That's a line I don't cross. Can I trust that you can, he said, not because I'm asking you to, because I'm telling you it's a fact. She sat with that. Outside through the restaurant's front glass, the city was doing what cities do at 11 at night, moving and indifferent and enormous. She thought about her apartment. She thought about Lily's arm hanging off the bed. She thought about 2 explosive charges in a car that would have left nothing. She said, "What do you want from me, Marco?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned his glass on the tablecloth once the way he did when he was thinking. "Right now, I want you to go home and not worry tonight. I have a car outside. The car that drove me home last week. The same one, the same driver. He'll be there when you need him." "I don't need a driver." "Humor me," he said, and for the first time since she had known him, the word humor landed like something almost warm. She stood up. She folded her apron. She said, "I need you to understand something." He looked up at her. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I know what you are. I've been smart enough to understand it without being told, and I'm not afraid of it, but I'm also not going to pretend I know what I'm walking into, because I don't." He held her gaze. "I know. And I need you to tell me the truth when I ask you questions, not the version that protects me from information. The actual truth." "That's a request I can honor," he said. "Good." She picked up her bag. "Then I'll see you next Thursday." She walked out through the restaurant's front door, and the car was there at the curb, and she got in without hesitating and sat in the back and let the city slide past the window and thought about what had just happened, which was at minimum a conversation that had changed something she couldn't name yet. The driver pulled up to her building. She thanked him. She went inside. She checked on Lily, who had flipped onto her back and was frowning at the ceiling in her sleep like she was working something out. Claire sat on the edge of her own bam and thought about Renata Cozy and about background checks and about the word complication and about a man who said he could honor the truth and said it like he meant it. She thought about what it meant that she had given him her daughter's name like an offering, and he had accepted it with exactly the right amount of gravity. Not too much, not too little, just exactly the weight it deserved. She thought about the fact that she was not, in spite of everything, afraid. That was the part that surprised her most. She should have been frightened. By any reasonable measure, she had every reason to be. Instead, what she felt sitting on the edge of her bed at close to midnight was something much more complicated than fear. It was the feeling of having been seen fully and accurately by someone who didn't need anything from her, and the disorienting clarity that came from being looked at that carefully. She didn't trust it. She was not naive enough to trust a feeling that convenient, but she didn't dismiss it either, because what she had also learned in 36 years of being practical and careful and very good at reading rooms was that sometimes the thing you weren't expecting was the one you had actually been moving toward all along. Not because the world was arranged for your benefit, but because some moments had a weight to them that you could feel in your body before you understood it in your head. And this moment, these last 11 days, starting with 2 men in an alley and a word she should not have understood, had that weight. She just didn't know yet what it was heavy with. She lay down. She closed her eyes. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street below, and she noticed it and then let it go because she was learning faster than she would have liked the particular skill of living in a world where some threats were real and some were shadows, and the difference mattered enormously. She slept. 3 days later, she was picking Lily up from school when a black car she didn't recognize pulled past the school entrance very slowly, and she felt her whole body go still. Then the car turned the corner and didn't come back, and she spent the walk home doing the mental math on whether she was being paranoid or perceptive and not being able to land cleanly on either. That night, she picked up her phone 3 times to call the number Enzo had given her. She set it back down 3 times. On the 4th, she dialed. He picked up on the 2nd ring and said, "Claire." "There was a car," she said, "outside Lily's school." A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "What did it look like?" She described it. Make color approximate year the way it slowed. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Give me 20 minutes." She waited 20 minutes. He called back. "It was one of mine," he said. "I put a watch on the school. I should have told you." She breathed out slowly through her nose. "Yes," she said. "You should have." "You're right. I'll tell you every time from now on." "Marco," she paused, "you put a watch on my daughter's school without telling me." "Yes, because you think there's a threat. Because I believe in not waiting until there is one." She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen counter. "Is there something you haven't told me?" The pause this time was half a second longer. "There's movement on the other side that I'm watching. Nothing confirmed. I don't deal in unconfirmed information." "But you put a car outside an 8-year-old school." "Yes." She stood there in her kitchen with her hand on the counter and her daughter's voice floating down the hallway from her bedroom, and she understood in that moment with absolute clarity that the door she had walked through 11 days ago was not going to swing back the other way. Not because she had no choice, but because Lily was everything, and a man she had known for 4 weeks was standing outside her daughter's school in the dark to make sure of it, and whatever that meant, whatever it cost, whatever it opened up in front of her, she was not going to stand in the kitchen and pretend it was nothing. "Thank you," she said. She kept her voice steady. "You don't have to thank me for that," he said. "I know," she said. "I did it anyway." The week after the phone call about the car, Claire stopped pretending she wasn't paying attention to things. She had spent 4 years at Renata's being professionally invisible, and that skill had served her extraordinarily well, right up until the moment it stopped being enough. Now she noticed things. She noticed the black car that sat 2 blocks from her building every morning and was gone by 9. She noticed that the man who worked the door of the dry cleaner across the street from Lily's school was new, and that he had the particular posture of someone who had been trained to look casual. She noticed that Enzo had a habit of appearing in her peripheral vision approximately once every 48 hours in locations that should have been random but weren't. She said nothing about any of it, but she noticed. What she also noticed, and this was the part she was less comfortable with, was herself. The way she moved through her days had shifted in some small but structural way, like a load-bearing wall that had been quietly repositioned. She was still efficient, still precise, still the person who got things done and did not require managing. But there was a new current running underneath all of it, a low-level alertness that she couldn't turn off and wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. On Tuesday, 11 days after the school car incident, she was on her break at Renata's when Marcus came to find her in the back hallway and said in a voice that was trying very hard to be neutral, "You have a visitor." She looked at him. "I'm on break." "I know." He said he'd wait. She already knew who it was. She wasn't sure what that said about her. Marco was standing near the service entrance, not inside, not at a table, just standing near the door with his hands in his coat pockets, and when she pushed through, he looked up and said, "I know this is your break. I won't keep you long." "What happened?" she said immediately, because a man like Marco Key did not come to the back entrance of a restaurant in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon to make small talk. "Nothing happened," he said. "That's what I wanted to tell you." She looked at him. "You came here to tell me nothing happened." "There was a situation we were watching that I thought had a chance of escalating." "It didn't. I wanted you to know." She studied his face. "Is that the only reason you're here?" He held her gaze for a moment. "I wanted to see that you were all right." She breathed out through her nose. "Marco." "What?" "You can't do that." "Do what?" "Show up in the middle of a Tuesday," she said. Oh, she kept her voice even and low, "because you wanted to see that I was all right. That doesn't work for me." He was quiet. "I have a chihuahua," she said. "I have a life. I have a daughter who asks me questions, and I need to have answers. And every time you appear somewhere unexpected, it reminds me that the edges of my life have shifted in ways I still don't fully understand. So I need you to tell me when you're coming. I need that to be a rule." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right. That's it, just all right. What else would you like me to say?" She pressed her lips together. "I don't know. Something that takes more than a second to agree to." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "I should have called first. I'll call first. Is that better?" "It's a start," she said. He nodded. Then, without the transition she was expecting, he said, "I want to talk to you about something. Can you have dinner this week?" She stared at him. "Dinner? Yes." "Here." "Not here," he said. "Somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't your workplace." She opened her mouth and closed it again. The practical part of her brain, which was most of her brain, was running through every reason this was complicated. The other part, the part she was less in the habit of consulting, was very quiet in a way that felt like something other than uncertainty. "Thursday," she said. "Lily has a school thing and she's sleeping at a friend's house." "Thursday," he said. "I'll call with details." He left before she could say anything else. She stood at the service entrance for a moment and thought about what had just happened, and then she went back inside and finished her break and worked the rest of her shift with the precise, contained focus of someone who has decided not to think about something until they absolutely have to. She did not tell Desiree. She did not tell anyone. She drove home in her own car, which she had started doing again once she was certain the immediate threat had passed, and she picked up Lily from Mrs. Caruso's and made dinner and helped with homework and read 2 chapters of the book Lily was obsessed with. And she did all of it with her full attention, because Lily deserved her full attention, and because the ability to be in 2 places at once in her own head was not a skill she had ever wanted to develop. But that night after Lily was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her, and she was honest with herself in the way she only ever was after midnight, when the day had exhausted all her better defenses. She was not walking toward this because she had no choice. She was walking toward it because some part of her, the part that had stood in that service corridor and made a decision in 15 seconds, was still making that same decision. Still choosing to move toward the thing instead of away from it. Still operating on the instinct that had never once led her wrong, even when everything around it looked like it should. She picked up her phone and looked at Marco's contact information, which Enzo had put in her phone the same night he'd told her the threat was neutralized. She had never deleted it. She had never intended to. She put the phone back down and went to bed. Thursday came. He had texted her the name of a restaurant she didn't know downtown, the kind of place that wasn't in any guide, but where everyone who knew anything about this city knew the food was extraordinary. She had looked it up. It had no website. It had no reviews. It existed purely by word of mouth, which told her everything she needed to know about the kind of people who ate there. She wore a dark blue dress that she had bought 2 years ago for a friend's wedding and had worn exactly once. She told herself she chose it because it was the most practical option that wasn't a work uniform. She did not entirely believe herself. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she came in, which was such an old-fashioned gesture that it surprised her. And he looked at her the way he looked at everything, with that complete, unhurried attention, and said, "You look different." "I'm wearing different clothes," she said. "That's not what I mean." She sat down. "Then what do you mean?" "You look like yourself," he said, "outside of the restaurant. It's different." She picked up the water glass. "Good different or bad different?" "Good, he said simply, and moved on before she could decide what to do with it. They ordered. The food was as extraordinary as she had expected. They talked, and the talking was easier than it had any right to be, which she had suspected might be the case and was still not fully prepared for. He asked about Lily, and she talked about her daughter the way she never did at work, fully and without editing, and he listened with the same focused quality he brought to everything and asked questions that showed he had retained the details from the last time she had mentioned them. She told him about Lily's father briefly because it seemed dishonest not to. He had left when Lily was 14 months old and Claire had been 28, and she had made peace with it in the way you make peace with things that were never going to be what you needed them to be. Marco listened without interrupting and didn't offer condolences or commentary, which was exactly right. She asked him about his family. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "My mother is in Naples. She's in good health. We speak on Sundays." He paused. "My father died when I was 19. He was involved in this world. I took over what he left before I fully understood what it meant." "And then you understood," she said. "And then I understood," he confirmed, "and I had already made certain choices that couldn't be unmade." "Do you regret them?" He considered this the way he considered everything seriously without performance. "Some of them. Not the ones that kept people I was responsible for alive." She looked at him. "How many people are you responsible for?" "More than you'd think," he said. "Less than some." They were on the second course when his phone, which had been face down on the table, vibrated twice in quick succession. He glanced at it and something changed in his face. It was subtle, the same fractional shift she had learned to read, but it was there. "I have to make a call," he said. "2 minutes." He stepped away from the table. She watched him cross to the far side of the room and stand with his back to the wall and speak into the phone with the compressed focus of someone receiving bad news in real time. She had seen that body language before. She had seen it in the hours and days after the bane, in the way his men moved and in the way he spoke, and in the exact quality of attention he brought to problems that required immediate handling. He came back to the table and sat down and picked up his fork, and she said, "What happened?" It was not a question. He knew that and didn't treat it like one. "One of the men involved in the device," he said, "he's been located. There's a conversation that needs to happen tonight." "A conversation," she said. "My kind," he said, and his voice was very even. She looked at him for a moment. "Will anyone be hurt?" "That depends on the conversation." She processed this. She looked down at her plate and then back up at him. "Should we finished dinner," he said. "This is handled by other people. I don't need to be there." "But you want to be." He held her gaze. "I want to be right here," he said, and he said it without deflection and without the softening that would have made it easier to dismiss. She held that for a moment, and then she said, "Tell me something true. What would you like to know?" "Why me?" she said. "Specifically." "You have people around you. You have Enzo, who I can tell has been with you a very long time. You have an entire structure of people whose whole job is to handle things. Why does a waitress who overheard something in a service corridor matter to you past the point of professional courtesy?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because when you sat down at my table that first night and told me what you heard, you looked frightened, but you didn't act frightened. You had already decided what the right thing was, and you were doing it regardless. And I haven't seen that in a very long time." He paused. "The people around me are loyal. They're capable. But they do what they do because of obligation or money or history. You had none of those. You had no reason at all. And you did it anyway." She looked at him. Something in her chest was doing the thing she had stopped trying to flatten. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me." There is a faction one that has been working against me for about 8 months that has been trying to find leverage, not money, not territory, something personal." He paused. "They put the device in the car because a direct confrontation with me would be costly. They want to create instability without a direct engagement. When that failed, they started looking for other pressure points." She went very still. "You're a pressure point," she said. "You could become one," he said, "if this continues." "If what continues?" He held her gaze. "This." The words sat between them with the weight of everything they had not said in 3 weeks. She breathed through it. She thought about Lily. She thought about the car outside the school and the man at the dry cleaner, and Enzo appearing in her peripheral vision like a reliable shadow. "You're telling me," she said carefully, "that being around you puts me in danger?" "Yes." "And you're telling me this at dinner?" "I'm telling you this because you asked me to tell you the truth," he said, "and because you deserve to make an informed decision." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city made its city sounds distant and constant and entirely indifferent. She thought about 15 seconds in a service corridor, in a tray of water glasses, and her hands going cold. "You already knew this before tonight," she said. "Yes." "And you asked me to dinner anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted one evening," he said, "where I was sitting across from someone who looked at me like a person and not a problem." That landed somewhere deep and real, and she did not try to move away from it. She said, "I'm not going anywhere, Marco." He looked at her. "I'm not saying that to be reckless," she said. "I'm saying it because I've already thought about this. I've been thinking about it since the first Thursday. And I understand what I'm walking toward, and I understand what it costs, and I have looked at all of it very carefully the way I look at everything, and I'm still here." He held her gaze for a moment that lasted longer than most. "Lily," he said, "she stays outside of this completely." "That's not negotiable," Claire said. "Not for 1 second." "I know," he said. "I told you that already. I meant it then, and I mean it now." She nodded once. They finished dinner. He drove her home himself, which she hadn't expected a detail so ordinary in its intimacy that she felt it more than anything that had been said. He pulled up outside her building and walked her to the door, and they stood there for a moment, in the way of two people who are deciding what the next thing is. She said, "Thank you for being honest with me." "Thank you for not running," he said. She almost told him she had considered Ed. That there had been a night 6 days ago when she had sat on the edge of her bed and thought very seriously about calling in her notice at Renata's and taking Lily somewhere quiet and letting all of this fold back into whatever world it had come from. She had thought about it the way you think about something that isn't actually an option, turning it over to see all the sides and then setting it back down. She didn't tell him that, but something in the way he looked at her made her think he already knew. She went inside. She checked on Lily asleep and frowning at the ceiling in her usual way. She stood in the hallway for a long time with her hand on the wall and breathed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marco. 4 words. The address of her building followed by "confirmed secure tonight." She looked at those words for a long moment. Then she texted back, "Thank you." "Good night." His response came back in under a minute. Just 3 words. "Good night, Claire. Safe." She put the phone down on the nightstand. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet of the apartment and thought about a man who put the word "safe" at the end of a text, like a period at the end of a sentence, like a habit so old it had become involuntary, like the last thing he said before he put down everything else and let the night be whatever it was going to be. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who had every reason to look away. She thought about the factions and the leverage and the pressure points and all of it spread out in front of her like a map of territory she was still learning. And she thought about how she was not afraid. She was still remarkably and inconveniently not afraid. And whether that was courage or something else entirely, she genuinely did not know. What she knew was this: she had made decisions in her life, real ones, the kind that mattered, and she had made them the same way every time. Not by calculating the risk down to 0, not by waiting until the path was clear, but by standing at the edge of something and deciding whether the thing on the other side was worth the distance between here and there. The distance this time was significant. She was not pretending otherwise. But what was on the other side of it, what she had seen in 3 weeks of careful, honest, unglamorous proximity to a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, that was also significant. She closed her eyes. 2 floors below on the street, a car sat at the curb with its lights off. It would still be there in the morning. She knew that now. She had stopped needing to check. That she thought was either the most dangerous thing about all of this or the most true. 3 weeks after dinner, Marco moved them. He didn't ask. He called on a Wednesday morning while Lily was at school and Claire was between shifts, and he said, "I want to talk to you about your building." "Oui," she said, "what about it?" He said, "I'd like you to consider a different one." She sat down at the kitchen table with her coffee and she said, "You found something." "Nothing confirmed, but the building you're in has 3 points of entry that aren't monitored, and the parking structure is accessible from 2 streets, and the night staff is one man who is 63 years old and goes to sleep in his chair by 11. He paused. "I've had it assessed. Twice." She thought about the car outside the school. She thought about the faction. She thought about leverage and pressure points and all the vocabulary of a world she was learning against her will. "Where," she said, "a building on Carver Street, 14 floors, full-time security keycard entry, monitored parking. The unit is on the 9th floor, 2 bedrooms. It's available immediately." "How much?" "It's handled." "Marco," her voice was flat. "How much?" A pause. "It's owned by someone associated with my interests. You would be a tenant. If it makes it more comfortable for you, you pay rent. I'll set a number." "I pay market rate," she said. "Claire, market rate," she said, "or I stay where I am." Another pause, shorter this time. "Market rate," he said. "I need to see it before I agree to anything." "Of course, and Lily has opinions about her room." Something in his voice shifted in the way she had learned to hear. "Then bring Lily." She stopped. "You want to meet her?" "I want her to approve of the room she'd be sleeping in," he said. "Whether I meet her is your decision." She held the phone and thought about what it meant that her first reaction had not been no. That her first reaction had been something closer to, of course, carefully, but of course. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he confirmed. She spent the next 48 hours in a state of controlled internal noise, that she managed the way she managed everything by staying busy, staying useful, staying focused on the practical next thing. She packed a box. She made a list. She told Lily they might be moving to a new apartment, and Lily asked if she could have a bigger closet, and Claire said possibly, which Lily accepted as a yes. Saturday morning, Claire drove them to Carver Street herself. The building was everything Marco had described. The lobby was quiet and well-maintained, and the man at the front desk stood up when they walked in and said, "Ms. Navarro, welcome," like she already lived there, like it was already decided. Lily looked at the lobby ceiling, which was high, and said, "This is fancy." "It's just a building," Claire said. "Our building doesn't have a guy at the desk," Lily pointed out. They took the elevator to 9. The unit was at the end of the corridor, and the door was already unlocked, and Claire pushed it open, and Lily walked through ahead of her, the way children do without caution, with complete open curiosity, and stood in the middle of the main room and turned in a slow circle. Marco was already there. He was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at Lily first, not at Claire, and he said in a voice that Claire had never heard him use before, something quieter and more careful, "You must be Lily." Lily looked at him. "Who are you?" "My name is Marco. I know your mom from the restaurant." Lily considered him with the frank, undiplomatic assessment that 8-year-olds deploy without mercy. "Do you work there?" "No," he said. "I eat there." "Oh." She looked around the apartment. "Is this your apartment?" "No, it could be yours if your mom decides she likes it." Lily looked at Claire. Claire looked at Marco. There was a whole conversation in that 3-second exchange that no one spoke aloud. Lily walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Claire followed, and behind her she heard Marco follow at enough distance to make it clear he was not inserting himself, but was available if asked. The second bedroom had a window that faced east and enough space for a bed and a desk and a bookshelf, and Lily stood in the center of it and said, "It's bigger than mine at home." "It is," Claire said. "Can I paint it?" Claire looked at Marco over her shoulder. He said whatever color she wants. Lily said green, the kind that's kind of blue but not really blue. Marco said sage. Lily stared at him. "You know what sage is? I renovated a building last year. I know more about paint colors than I ever expected to." Lily looked at him for another long, assessing moment and then turned back to the window and said, "Okay, I like it." Just like that, 8 years old and done. Claire stood there with the particular feeling of something clicking into place that she had not given it permission to click into, and she pressed it down and said, "We'll talk about it." And Lily said, "That means yes." And she was not wrong. They left an hour later. Marco walked them to the parking structure and stood with his hands in his pockets while Lily got in the car and buckled herself in with the efficiency of a child who has been doing it herself for 2 years. And Claire stood at the driver's side door and said quietly, "Thank you." "Did she like it?" he said. "She named a paint color. She's already moved in her head." He almost smiled. "And you?" "I'm thinking," she said. "Think fast," he said. "The building is good, but the offer on this unit won't last more than a week." "You said I could take my time." "I said Saturday," he corrected. "It's Saturday." She looked at him. He looked back at her. In the back seat, Lily was already reading. "I'll call you tonight," she said. She called him at 9:15 after Lily was asleep, and she said yes, and he said good, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And then he said, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me." "Someone reached out this week from the other side. They made a request." She went still. "What kind of request?" "They asked me to cut contact with you. They said it was a courtesy, a warning before things escalated." The kitchen was very quiet. "What did you say?" "I told them the nature of my associations was not their concern," he said. "I told them if they contacted me again on this subject, the conversation would take a different form." She breathed. "So they know about me." "They knew about you before I did, Bob," he said. "That's part of what I've been trying to tell you. This wasn't random. The device, the location, the timing, someone knew my patterns. Someone who had access to information about where I would be and when." She processed this. "Someone inside your organization. Someone with access to it," he said. "Not necessarily inside, but close. And you don't know who?" "Not yet." She sat with that, the full weight of it. Someone had planned to kill him and had known exactly where he would be. Someone was still watching. Someone had called this week and mentioned her by name or by implication, and Marco had told them where to go. "How long have you known about the inside access?" she said. "Since the night you warned me. The placement of the device required knowledge that only a limited number of people had. And in 3 weeks you haven't narrowed it down." "I've narrowed it significantly," he said. "I haven't confirmed it. There's a difference." "When you confirm it," she said, "what happens?" He was quiet for a moment. "A conversation." "Your kind," she said. "My kind," he said. She looked at the kitchen wall. She thought about what it meant to love someone in this world. Not that she was saying that, not that she was naming it, but she was looking at the shape of it from a distance and acknowledging that shapes existed. She thought about what it cost to be the kind of man who protected people he was responsible for and carried the weight of that and still showed up and told the truth when asked. "Be careful," she said. "I'm always careful," he said. "Be more careful," she said. "Whoever it is, they already tried once. They won't get more patient." He was quiet for a moment that felt different from his other silences. "I know," he said. They moved on the following Thursday. It happened efficiently the way things happened when Marco was involved. 2 men showed up with a truck and handled the heavy items and didn't make conversation. Enzo appeared at noon with coffee and helped Claire organize the kitchen, while Lily supervised the arrangement of her bedroom furniture with the bossy competence of someone who had very clear opinions about where the desk should go relative to the window. By 4 in the afternoon, they were in. By 5, Lily had decided the desk was in the wrong place after all, and Enzo moved it without complaint while Lily directed him like a small general. And Enzo, who Claire had seen handle situations that would have broken most people, followed instructions with complete patience. She watched that from the doorway of Lily's room and felt something crack open in her chest that she didn't have a word for. Marco arrived at 6 with food from a place she didn't recognize enough for all of them, and they sat around the new kitchen table and ate, and Lily talked and the men listened, and Claire watched all of it with the sideways attention she gave things that were too significant to look at directly. At 7:30, after Lily had migrated to her room to arrange her books, and after Enzo and the other men had gone, Marco stood into the kitchen and said, "How does it feel?" She looked at him. "Strange, good, both." "Both is honest," he said. She started to clear the containers from dinner, and he moved to help, and she let him, and they worked side by side in the kitchen in a silence that was entirely comfortable in a way that should have taken much longer to arrive at. And she thought about how little she had predicted any of this and how little the unpredictability had cost her in the end. She said without planning to, "My ex used to say I was impossible to read." Marco looked at her. He was wrong. Most people would agree with him. "Most people weren't paying attention," Marco said. He said it simply not as a compliment, as a statement of fact, and she believed it because that was how he said everything. She put down the container in her hands and turned to face him and said, "I want to talk about what happens if you find the person inside." He met her eyes. "All right. I want to know what you're going to do." "I'm going to handle it," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you," he said. "Not because I'm hiding something from you. Because what I do in that situation depends on what I find, and I don't deal in hypotheticals." She looked at him for a long moment. "I need you to promise me something. If I can. Whatever happens on your side of this, whatever you handle and however you handle it, I need you to make sure it doesn't come back through my door, through Lily's door." His face went very still. "Claire, I mean it. I've accepted a lot. I've walked toward a lot of things I would have walked away from a year ago. But she is the line. There is no version of any of this where she pays for it." "I know that," he said. His voice was completely even. "I have known that since the moment you told me her name. There is no version of my world where a child is a casualty. That is a line I drew a very long time ago, and I have never crossed it, and I will not start now." She held his gaze. "Say it clearly." "Lily is untouchable," he said, "by anyone, on any side. If someone reaches toward her, they have a problem with me that has no negotiated resolution. That is not a promise I make lightly. It's a fact I'm stating." She breathed out slowly. "Okay. Okay," he said. She picked up the container again. They finished clearing the table. And then she said, "There's something else." He waited. "Renata Cozy called Marcus yesterday," she said. She wants to move me to a different section. Marco looked at her. Which section? The private dining room. Exclusive bookings only. She didn't give a reason. Marcus said she asked for me specifically. He was quiet for a moment. Did she say anything else? Just that she felt my skill set was being underutilized in the East Wing. Claire paused, which is interesting because the East Wing is the most demanding section in the restaurant. It is, Marco said. The private dining room is different. How different? He looked at her with the particular steadiness of someone deciding how much to say. The private dining room hosts conversations that don't happen in the East Wing. The guests are different. The things they discuss with are different. Renata uses it strategically. She stared at him. She's positioning me there deliberately. Renata doesn't do anything that isn't deliberate, he said. Why? Because she watched what you did the night you warned me, and she made a decision about what you are, he said. And in Renata's world, someone with your instincts and your composure in that room is an asset. The word landed with a weight she hadn't expected. An asset to whom? To her. To her operation. To the web of things she's managed in the city for 30 years. He paused. Renata Cozy is not simply the owner of a restaurant, Claire. She is someone who has survived in this world longer than almost anyone else I know by being very, very good at understanding people and putting them exactly where they're most useful. Claire looked at him. And you knew this. You knew what the restaurant was. I've known Renata for 15 years, and you kept coming back. I kept coming back because it's the only restaurant in this city where I can sit and have a meal without feeling like the room is working against me. He paused, or it was, until 3 weeks ago. She looked at him. And now, he said, the room contains you, so the calculation is entirely different. She held that for a moment. Outside, the city had shifted into its evening register, the particular hum of a Thursday night settling in. 2 floors below, she could hear something, a door, a voice, the ordinary sounds of a building with people in it, and she thought about how strange it was to be standing in a new kitchen, in a new apartment, with a man she had known for less than a month and feel more grounded than she had in years. What do I do about the private dining room, she said. What do you want to do? I don't know yet. Then think about it, he said. Don't decide until you know. And if Renata pushes, tell her you need time, he said. She'll respect it. She respects most things as long as you're direct about them. Claire nodded slowly. Then she said, you trust her. In the specific way you trust someone who has never lied to you but whose interests don't always align with yours, he said, which is to say carefully. But yes, she thought about that. She thought about careful trust and aligned interests in the particular architecture of a world where everything had 2 meanings, and the second one was always the one that mattered. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas and said, the Wi-Fi password doesn't work. Claire said, I'll reset it in a minute. Lily looked at Marco. Are you staying for dinner? You already had dinner. Are you staying for TV? Marco looked at Claire. Claire looked at her daughter. It's a school night, Claire said. That's not a no, Lily said. Lily, I'm just saying, Marco said very quietly so that only Claire could hear, I should go. She walked him to the door. In the hallway before he left, he looked at her and said, you're going to be all right here. I know, she said. I'm going to find the person inside my organization, he said. When I do, things will stabilize. I want you to know that's where we're headed. And between now and then, he said, I'm here. She looked at him, he looked back, and the thing she had been not naming for 3 weeks sat between them in that hallway with the patience of something that didn't need to be rushed because it had already decided to stay. Good night, Marco, she said. Good night, he said. She went back inside. Lily was already on the couch with the remote. Claire sat down beside her, and Lily leaned against her the way she had since she could walk heavy and trusting and warm, and they watched television for 45 minutes, and Claire kept her arm around her daughter and felt underneath everything the thing she had not let herself feel in a very long time. Safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because something was being built carefully and honestly and without false promises around the people who mattered, that she thought was worth more than the absence of risk. It always had been. She just hadn't had anyone worth building it with until now. She had been in the new apartment for 11 days when Enzo called at 6:40 in the morning and said, "Don't go to work today." Claire was standing at the kitchen counter with her coffee and her coat half on, and she said, "Why?" "Mr. Kie will call you in the next 10 minutes. Stay inside. Keep Lily home." The line went dead. She stood there with her coat on and her coffee cooling, and she did the thing she had gotten very good at, which was staying still and not letting the panic have the floor. She set the coffee down. She took off her coat. She walked to Lily's room and opened the door and said in the tone she used for delays and traffic and all the ordinary disruptions of their life, "Change of plans. You're with me today." Lily looked up from her pillow. "Is it a snow day?" "Something like that," Claire said. Her phone rang at 6:51. "Marco," she answered and said, "What happened?" "The person I've been looking for," he said. "We found him last night." She moved to the kitchen and closed the door behind her. A pause that was 3 seconds too long. "A man named Caruso. He's been with me for 6 years. He had access to everything, schedules, locations, the car." Another pause. "He was at the restaurant the night of the device. He was the one who told them when to move." She stood very still. "Caruso," she said. "As in Juan Vito?" "Yes," Marco said. "He's related to your neighbor." The floor shifted under her feet in a way that had nothing to do with balance. She thought about Mrs. Caruso, who had sat with Lily every Thursday night for 2 years, who brought them soup when Lily had a cold, who fell asleep on the couch with the television on and never once asked questions about where Claire worked or what the tips were like or why certain cars sometimes sat at the curb. "Marco, bang." Her voice was flat. "My neighbor watched my daughter." "I know." "For 2 years she stopped." "Did she know what he was doing?" "We don't believe she was involved. He used her without her knowledge. She was his access point to you, but she didn't know that's what she was." Claire pressed her hand against the kitchen counter and breathed through the specific nausea of realizing how close the edges had always been. 2 years, every Thursday. The woman she trusted completely used as an instrument by someone who had been mapping the inside of her life. "Is she in danger?" Claire said. "We're watching her. She's not a target. She's not involved." "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she breathed. "What about him, Caruso?" "He's been handled," Marco said. His voice gave nothing. "The faction he was feeding information to has been notified that the channel is closed. There will be a period of recalibration on their side. During that period, we stay alert." "Recalibration," she said. "What does that mean in practice?" "It means they lost their inside access and their primary operative, and they need to assess whether they have the capacity to continue the current strategy. In my estimation, they don't, but I don't deal in certainties. So we wait. We're careful," he said, which is different from waiting. She looked at the closed kitchen door and thought about Lily on the other side of it, probably already back asleep with her arm hanging off the bed. She thought about 6 years. She thought about a man who ate branzino and said please and thank you and had been sitting across from someone who wanted him dead every single Thursday for 6 years, and how the only reason he was still alive was because a waitress had stepped outside for some air on the wrong night. "Claire," Marco said, "I'm here. I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." "Today is going to be quiet. Tonight may not be. I want you and Lily to stay in the building. I have 4 people in the building and 2 on Carver Street. You are the safest you have been since this started. But I need you to stay inside, and I need you to call me immediately if anything feels wrong. Not Enzo, me." "Okay," she said. "I mean anything. A sound you don't recognize, a knock you didn't expect. Anything." "I understand," she said. "Marco." "What?" "Are you safe?" A pause. "I'm always careful." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Shorter. "I'm safe," he said. "I'll check in at noon." He hung up. She stood in the kitchen with her phone in both hands and thought about what it meant to love someone whose version of "I'm safe" was "I'm always careful," and she was not pretending anymore that the word love wasn't applicable. She had stopped pretending that 3 days ago in the particular privacy of her own head, but she was holding it there for now, holding it the way you hold something fragile until you know it can bear weight. She unlocked the kitchen door and went to check on Lily. At 9:15, Lily was at the kitchen table with her schoolwork because Whatever the reason for staying home being behind was not something Claire permitted, and Claire was on the couch with her phone and a book she was not reading when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered carefully. "Hello. Ms. Navarro." A woman's voice. Precise. "This is Renata Cozy. I hope I haven't caught you at a bad time." Claire looked at the ceiling. "Ms. Cozy, how did you get this number?" "From Marcus," Renata said without apology. "I'm calling because I'd like to have a conversation with you today, in person." "I'm not available today." "I know about the situation with Caruso," Renata said. "I know you're in the building. I'm asking you to let me come to you." Claire's hand tightened on the phone. "Marco told you." "Marco didn't have to tell me anything," Renata said. "I've been running things in this city for 30 years, and very little happens inside my orbit without my knowing. I knew about Caruso 2 days ago. I let Marco handle it because it was his to handle." A pause. "I want to talk to you about what comes next. That conversation is yours." Claire looked across the kitchen at Lily, who was chewing her pencil and frowning at a math problem with the focused dissatisfaction of someone encountering a personal enemy. "1 hour, Claire said, the lobby." "I'll be there at 10, Renata said and hung up. Claire texted Marco. "Renata Cozy is coming. Lobby, 10 a.m. His response came in 40 seconds. "I know. She called me first. You don't have to meet with her." She texted back. "I want to hear what she says." A pause, then "I know you do. That's not a criticism." She put her phone down and told Lily she had a short meeting downstairs and that she would be back in an hour, and that if she needed anything, the front desk would call up, and She stopped herself. She said, "You have my number. Call me." Lily looked up. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Claire said. "Math first, then you can have the tablet." Lily looked at her for a moment with those eyes that saw more than an 8-year-old should have been able to see, and then she looked back at her paper and said, "Okay." Renata Cozy arrived at 10 on the dot. She sat in one of the lobby chairs and waited for Claire the way she waited for everything, with the patient, contained energy of someone who had never found it necessary to check their phone in a quiet moment. She looked at Claire when she came off the elevator, and she said, "Thank you for seeing me. You said you wanted to talk about what comes next," Claire said. "Start there." Renata looked at her with something close to appreciation. "I'm moving you to the private dining room," she said. "Not as a question, as a statement of what's going to happen. I wanted to tell you directly rather than through Marcus." "What exactly happens in the private dining room?" Claire said. "You serve dinner to people who require a specific kind of trust," Renata said. "People whose conversations are private. People who expect that the person across from them in a professional capacity is someone who knows how to hear without listening and see without watching, and understand the difference between information that is hers and information that belongs to the room." "You're describing what I already do in the East Wing." "I'm describing it at a higher level," Renata said. "The East Wing is managed discretion. The private dining room requires something different. It requires instinct. It requires the ability to read a room and adjust without being told to adjust." She paused. "You have been doing that for 4 years without knowing that anyone was watching." "I've been watching." Claire held her gaze. "To what end?" "To this one," Renata said simply. "I am 61 years old. I have been in this world since I was 22. I know what I'm looking for, and I rarely find it. I found it in you the night you sat down at Marco's table with a tray of glasses and told him not to get in his car." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You want me to be more than a server." "I want you to be what you already are," Renata said, "in a room where it matters more." "What does that mean in practice day to day? What am I actually doing?" Renata looked at her with the direct, unhurried gaze of someone who had been asked this question before and had always answered it the same way. "You observe, you retain. When something comes to your attention that I need to know, you tell me. When someone at a table needs managing in the old-fashioned sense, meaning they need to feel heard or settled or guided toward a decision, you manage them. You do all of it under the cover of the best service in this city, which you are already providing." She paused. "The compensation is 3 times what you're currently making." Claire looked at her. "And Marco, does he know about this offer?" "Marco knows I was going to make it. He doesn't know the details. Those are between you and me." Renata leaned forward very slightly. I want to be clear about something. I am not asking you to work against Marco. My interests and his have been aligned for 15 years, and that has not changed. What I'm asking is separate from whatever is between you and him personally. I am asking you professionally to use what you have in a room where it matters. Claire sat with it. She thought about 4 years of being the quiet one, the forgettable one, the one nobody saw. She thought about 15 seconds in a service corridor and every decision since lined up behind it like cars on a road that had always been going somewhere. She thought about what Renata had said: you observe, you retain, you tell me what I need to know. She thought about how she had been doing exactly that her entire adult life without anyone ever giving it a name. I need to think, she said. Of course, Renata said. She stood. One more thing. She paused. The man inside Marco's organization. Caruso, he was not the only one. Claire went still. Renata looked at her with the calm of someone delivering information that has already been processed and filed. There is a second person. Not inside Marco's organization. Inside mine. I have suspected for 4 months. I confirmed it yesterday. Who? That's being handled, Renata said. By me. Tonight. She looked at Claire with something that was not quite a warning and not quite a reassurance, but occupied the precise space between them. I tell you this not to alarm you. I tell you because when it's done, the faction that has been operating against both of us will be effectively dismantled. And when that happens, the world you are walking into will be considerably more stable than the one you've been navigating for the past month. She said goodnight. It was 10 in the morning, but she said goodnight like it was a period and walked out of the lobby. Claire stood there for a moment, and then she took the elevator back upstairs and she walked into the kitchen, and she sat down across from Lillian and she watched her daughter write numbers in a workbook with the focused determination of someone who has decided fractions are personally offensive, and she breathed in and out 3 times and let the morning settle. Mom, Lily said without looking up. What? You're doing the face. What a face? The one that means you're thinking very hard about something. I'm allowed to think hard. You're allowed to tell me things too, Lily said. She looked up and she had Claire's eyes and Claire's stubbornness in something else that was entirely her own. I know things are different now. The new apartment and Enzo and the man in the lobby who knows our names. I'm not dumb. I know you're not dumb, Claire said. Is Marco going to be around a lot? Claire looked at her daughter. I think so. Is that okay? Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to important things. He knew what sage was, she said, and he moved Enzo when I asked, and he brought enough food. She paused. So yeah, it's okay. Claire looked at her. Yeah, Lily said, and went back to her fractions. Marco called at noon exactly. Renata came, Claire said. I know. She texted me after. She said there's a second person inside her organization. I know about that too, he said. She told me this morning. She's handling it. She said tonight. Yes. And then it's over. The faction, the access, all of it. He was quiet for a moment. It becomes manageable, he said. I don't use the word over. But yes, what has been operating against us for the past 8 months will lose its infrastructure. That's real. She heard the word us, and she didn't say anything about it, and neither did he, but it sat there between them on the phone line with the easy permanence of something that had been true for a while and had just been said out loud for the first time. I'm going to take the private dining room, she said. He was quiet. Tell me why. Because Renata's right, she said. Because I've been doing it anyway without a name for it, and I might as well do it in a room where it counts for something. She paused. And because I understand now what this world is. It's not going to get simpler. And I'd rather be someone who knows what's happening than someone who gets protected from it. You're sure? I'm sure. Then it's the right decision, he said. For the record, I want you to know it doesn't change anything. What Renata does and what we are, those are separate. I know, she said. I mean it. Marco, I know. A pause, and in the pause she could hear him breathe just once in the way of someone who has been carrying something and has put it down for a moment. I'll come by tonight, he said. After Renata's thing is handled. After he confirmed. It'll be late. I'll be up, she said. He came at 11:40. She heard the elevator and then the knock, two precise taps, and she opened the door and looked at him, and she knew immediately from his face, from the very specific quality of exhaustion that was different from the exhaustion of a hard day, that it was done. She stepped back and he came inside, and she closed the door and they stood in the entryway for a moment. "Renata's person," she said. "Removed," he said. "Tonight, without complications." And the faction. "We reached out to their leadership 2 hours ago. The message was clear." He looked at her. "It's contained, not permanent. Nothing in this world is permanent, but contained for a foreseeable period. The immediate threat is gone." She breathed out slowly, fully, the way she hadn't been able to breathe fully since a Thursday night in November when she had stepped outside for air and heard a word she shouldn't have understood. "How do you feel?" she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said something she had not heard from him before. "Tired," he said. Just that. No precision, no armor. Just the word and the truth of it. She said, "Sit down." He sat at the kitchen table and she made tea, which she had never done for another adult in her apartment in 4 years. And she set it in front of him and sat across from him, and they were quiet for a few minutes in the way of two people who have been through something together and don't need to name it to share it. He said, "Caruso's aunt, your neighbor. Mrs. Caruso. She doesn't know," he said, "what he was doing or what happened to him. She won't hear it from us. She'll be told he left the city." Claire looked at him. She was kind to Lily. "I know," he said. "That matters." She held his gaze across the kitchen table, and she felt more clearly than she had felt anything in a very long time the specific shape of the person sitting across from her. Not the version she had assembled from East Wing observations in professional caution and the careful vocabulary of a world she was still learning. The actual person. The one who said tired when he was tired, and moved carefully through every decision, and had been doing this alone, fully alone, for a very long time, and had not in all of that time found someone who would look at him and not see a problem or a power or a resource, but just a man who needed to sit down and have a cup of tea in a kitchen that belonged to someone who was not afraid of him. She said, "I want to tell you something." He looked up. "I've been not saying something for about 3 weeks, she said, "and I'm going to say it now because I'm done managing it." He was completely still. "I'm not doing any of this because I have to," she said. "Not the apartment, not the private dining room, not any of it. I'm doing it because somewhere in the last 6 weeks I stopped being a woman who was walking through this and became a woman who was staying. And I want you to know that, clearly, without it being a thing that just sits between us and doesn't get named." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I need you to say it back," she said, "in whatever language you say things." He put down his cup. He looked at her across the table with the full, unhurried, unguarded attention she had first noticed in him the night she had sat down at his table and told him something he didn't want to hear. And he said, "I have been in this world since I was 19 years old. I have made decisions that cost things I can't get back. I have been careful and precise, and I have kept people I was responsible for alive, and I have done it alone because that was the only way I knew how." He paused. And then a woman walked back through a service corridor when anyone else would have kept walking, and she sat down across from me and told me the truth, and I have not been the same since that night. He held her gaze. "That's what I'm saying back." She looked at him. She felt the full weight of it. Not the fear she should have felt, not the caution she had practiced, but the thing underneath all of it, the thing she had been naming in her own head for weeks now, sitting there at the kitchen table with the city quiet outside and Lily asleep down the hall, and a man who had just told her the truth in the exact language she had asked for. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat in the kitchen for another hour, and they talked the way people talk when they have stopped managing distance easily and without strategy, about Lily's fractions and Renata's private dining room and a restaurant in Naples where Marco had eaten once at 17 and still thought about what it meant to build something when you already knew the Baeta. At 1 a.m, he stood up and said he needed to go, and she walked him to the door, and he stopped in the entryway and looked at her, and she looked at him, and he said, "I'll call in the morning." "I know," she said. "Not to check on you," he said. "Just to call." "I know that too," she said. He left. She locked the door. She stood in the entryway with her hand against the wood, and she listened to the building settle around her. The elevator, a door somewhere below. The sound of the city coming through the walls, distant and continuous and alive. And she felt it clearly, unmistakably, in a way she would not talk herself out of. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She went to check on Lily. Her daughter was asleep on her back with one arm across her chest and the other hanging off the edge of the bed. And the room was the particular soft dark of a child's room at night. And on the wall above the desk, the paint was sage kind of blue, but not really blue, and it had dried exactly right. Claire stood in the doorway for a long time. She thought about a Thursday in November and a word she should not have understood, and a choice she had made in 15 seconds that had rearranged the entire landscape of her life. She thought about what Renata had called it instinct. She thought about what Marco had called it rare. She thought about what Lily called it, which was just mom in the easy and unquestioning way children name the things that have always been true. She thought about the private dining room and what she would hear there and what she would do with it and who she was becoming in the doing. She thought about how she had spent 4 years perfecting the art of being invisible and how in the end it was exactly that invisibility, that patience, that precision, that practiced ability to see everything and show nothing that had walked her straight into the center of a life that was finally fully undeniably hers. She pulled Lily's door almost closed, leaving the same 2-inch gap she always left. And she went to her room and she lay down in the dark and she was not afraid. She had never been the kind of woman who walked away from the thing that needed to be done. She was not that woman now. She was something more, a woman who had walked towards something hard and dangerous and real with her eyes open and her hands steady and had come out the other side, not diminished but larger, not careful but clear. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. And that was the truest thing she had ever known about herself.